good overnight and welcome back into another episode of From Day One. At least I hope that we're going to be able to get this episode in. Power has been up, down, and every which way but loose, and I'm going to hope at least for the next 45 to 60 minutes it holds that we can get an episode taped. I will go back through the information I missed from Skeptic and the rest of them about what we had in part 2. Either do a recap special or package it all for tomorrow's part 2, one or the other, so that we can get a recap on that. In the meantime, we do have Dean Radin and Art Bell ready to take us through the overnight with their Global Consciousness Talk Part 2. So with that in this case, we have the... I don't know, if we still have the tower, we still have that, but we'll definitely have the dungeon to do. Let's rock in Dominion to Art Bell.
And some forms of psychokinetic influence. And then a whole bunch of things having to do with your own body. So those are the supernormal capacities. We're talking about levitation becoming very light, and gravitation, which is the opposite, becoming very heavy, about inedia, meaning you don't have to eat or drink anything. We're talking about invisibility, things that you'd expect to see in comic books. So those are described. They're considered to be rare even among the adepts, extremely rare to find anybody in today's world who can do these things, or at least is willing to show it. And by far, what's much more common are what we consider plain vanilla psychic experiences. Clairvoyance, precognition, that sort of thing.
Right. Okay. Boy, that's a long list. I don't even know where to pick up. With this list that you just gave me, have you scientifically concluded that there really are people that can do this, these various things? I mean, levitation, I'm very interested in psychokinetic ability. Have you actually seen it demonstrated?
At the macro scale, no. So we're talking about actual hovering of people, as in yogic flying? No. Even the best yogic flyers in the world can't hover. They hop, but they can't hover. And nobody can fly, as far as I can tell. In terms of macroscopic psychokinetic effects?
Yes.
No. I've seen things like spoons being bent in very bizarre ways that don't seem to be normal, including things like the bowl of a soup spoon bent in half. That would be very difficult to do if it wasn't a trick, and there are, of course, plenty of ways of tricking it.
Well, that is my question. Has it always turned out to be a trick, or do you think there really are people that can actually do that?
Well, I would say that the vast majority of things you see on YouTube are tricks. People who claim to be able to do any of these things. So those are almost certainly tricks. In cases where people are sincere, like disciples of gurus who claim that they've seen certain things, I've seen some of the videos that they've shot of what's supposedly telepathy, or not telepathy, but levitation.
Right.
And it's not. It's hopping. For movement of objects through psychokinetic means, we're talking about static objects, not something even like a little pinwheel, but just put a pen on a desk and move it mentally. I've never seen that happen.
Oh, I have tried so hard.
Yeah. But in terms of pinwheels, extremely sensitive systems, yes, I've seen things that I think are real. Most of the evidence for mind-matter interaction are random systems, or what we've been doing recently involving optical systems with interferometers and things of that sort.
Right. I know the Russians did a lot of experiments in this area. Do you think, when we get back, we're in a break, do you think any of that is real? And so we'll pick up on that when we get back. But boy, the Russians really did some impressive stuff. Could have been tricks. Who knows? I'm Art Bell.
coming to you at the speed of light in the darkness. This is Midnight in the Desert with Art Bell. Now, here's Art.
Dr. Radin is my guest, Dr. Dean Radin, who is chief scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. His latest book is Supernormal, and we're beginning to talk about supernormal things here. And indeed they are. And I did mention at the break the Russians. Boy, they did some seemingly really incredible experiments that were captured on video some time ago. And I'm sure that in your quest you've looked at those, and I wonder what you concluded.
Yes, I've looked at those, and the key word you mentioned is seeming.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that it's a very, very difficult to know based on the videos. Even videos that haven't been made public as to whether or not what we're seeing is real or perhaps disinformation.
Are you privy to videos that are not public?
Some, yes, and also from China.
Really?
So it's not that different than what you can see on YouTube. The only difference perhaps is that the source of it is known, whereas sometimes on YouTube you never know who's posting what. So there, both in Russia and China, there are supposedly some highly talented individuals who are able to do things that we generally don't see in the West.
Doctor, are they ahead of us? In this field, are the Russians and the Chinese ahead of us?
I don't think so. No.
Good. That's nice to hear.
Yeah, we're dealing with phenomena that have been around since the beginning of humanity. I'm reasonably sure that all major governments are tracking research in this area, because the moment somebody gets a breakthrough, that's a major threat. But I don't think that there's very much secret government research going on at the moment.
Okay, actually, if a human, this is pure speculation, but I think it's good speculation, if I developed a superpower, and I could influence others or influence things, if I could set this pencil on end and knock it over with my mind, I'll tell you, Doctor, I don't think I'd tell a soul. I wouldn't tell anybody because, number one, people like yourself, well, no, you're a good guy. Other people like yourself would get me and dissect me quickly, and or other human beings, once they found out I really could do what I claimed I could do, would hate my guts. And I might seem like a novelty at first, but if I could do things that other people couldn't do, they would hate me eventually.
You are correct. It's a major threat. In many ways, it's a major threat, even if it had nothing to do with psychokinetic effects, just somebody being an extremely good telepath, for example.
Right.
Huge threat. So this actually brings us back to yoga.
It does.
One of the things that I wrote about in my book Supernormal is, well, why are these things talked about, these comic book style superpowers mentioned in yoga as kind of matter of fact, do these practices and you'll develop these effects. But it all comes with a proviso and a prohibition. There's actually says in some of the sutras, in the Yoga Sutras, which is like the classical book of yoga, that if you develop these abilities, you shall not demonstrate them to anyone, including honored teachers, for the very reason that you're saying. It's actually two reasons. One is that people are frightened. Even people who know about these things can be frightened if they have very strong abilities.
Oh, yes.
The second is that the moment you demonstrate it to somebody else, your ego will be inflated because you have a power and people will respond to it as a power. This is what gives rise to gurus who go a little bit nutty. It gives rise to Darth Vader falling to the dark side.
Yes.
It's extremely difficult to withstand the way that other people would respond to you if you actually demonstrated this. So that's why these big powers are, the student is told that you will encounter some of these, but do not demonstrate them.
No, I think it would also give rise to strapping me to a wood post and putting lots of flammable stuff below me and burning me eventually. I mean, maybe not in the modern world, but, you know, I'd be filled with lead. I'd one way or the other, I would not be tolerated. So
even in the modern world.
Even that's right.
Yep. Even, I mean, maybe not in the United States, we hope, but in other countries where there's still pretty high superstition, there is fear of witches and people are killed.
Oh, absolutely. Well, look, even in the United States, we think we're so advanced in some ways we are, but our human emotions are pretty much as they always were. I grant you we're tolerating more, but somebody with that kind of power, for example, the ability to read one's mind, no way. That would simply not be tolerated. So you have to imagine if there are people capable of this, they're keeping it to themselves. Fair?
Yes. However, the reason why we study, the reason we do experiments of the type that we study is to see whether in principle something like telepathy is real, and in principle is psychokinetic effects real. And we don't generally go looking for people who claim that they have these abilities, because sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So instead, we work with the prototypical college sophomore. In other words, people who think that they might or might not have the ability, they don't really know, but they're willing to try an experiment. That's how the vast majority of psi research is done, with just ordinary people to see if the yogis were correct in saying that this is a natural inherent ability, and most people quite weak, but nevertheless there. And so we know from those experiments that average people selected pretty much at random can demonstrate telepathy to a very weak degree, but for a real effect in the laboratory. And the same with precognition, clairvoyance, and psychokinesis.
All right.
So that's how we know these effects are real. But at the extreme levels, the Olympic levels, those people are very difficult to find.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, here's an off-the-wall question for you. It is thought generally that teenage girls in their formative years, at 13, 14 years old with the hormones just raging away, have powers that are abnormally higher than others. Is that just like something that belongs in Mythbusters, or is there possibly something to it?
Are you talking about psychic powers or psychic abilities?
Yes.
I would say probably not. No.
Okay. Mythbusters.
Yeah. The few studies looking at developmental stages in psychic ability, the peak usually is at 4 years old.
Really?
Yeah, it's young children who don't know yet that they're not supposed to do these kinds of things.
Yes, well, that I get. Very interesting. 4 years old. And they learn that they are not supposed to be able to do that, by the time they're 7 or 8?
Well, when they start to become socialized and they realize that if you start revealing secrets of your friends, you're going to get shunned real quick.
Uh-huh.
So they don't do that.
But at 4, they don't know what they can't do, so they do it.
Right. Yeah, and if they're younger than that, then their language skills and their interaction skills are not quite developed enough. So somewhere around 4 years old. And by the way, around 4 years old is where you get most of the evidence for reincarnation.
You're absolutely right. What an interesting point you've made. Wow. Most of the evidence for reincarnation, God knows I've heard so many, as you point out, about 4-year-olds who will say things like, oh, I did that. I was there a long time ago. Or they suddenly recall something just out of the blue that cannot be. There's a great deal of evidence for that. And you're right, just about that age, before they know they can't do it, and after they've got enough language skills to prove they can.
Right.
Wow.
So fortunately, the abilities are not suppressed completely. And that's why we're able to take college sophomores and see effects. Now, if you start selecting people based on reports that they had, some people become adults and they never lose these abilities, even quite strong as adults. If you select those people out and you do the experiments with them, you get much stronger effects in these studies. So we're able to do a variety of partitioning the data according to personality and experience and so on, and you get pretty much what you would expect. The talent makes a difference.
Okay, indeed. All right, let's talk for a moment about yoga. What we know of as yoga in the West, and I'm no expert, so you may need to define yoga for me, just period, the common Western definition. And then what you're talking about, the yoga you're talking about, is a different animal, right?
Well, it's the original animal. So yoga in the West is kind of a quasi-spiritual aerobics. It's stretching with special pants. Let's put it that way. And it's perfectly fine, but it's only one tiny little component of the original classical yoga. And what we do today is mostly poses and stretching and some strength building, and that's all mainly about what in a classical sense we call the asanas, the poses. The purpose of the poses and the strength building was for one thing only in the original yoga. It was to make your body strong enough so you're able to sit down for very, very long periods of time. Okay. That's why. And so why do people need to sit for very long periods of time? It's because the goal in yoga was meditation, and all of the training physically and mentally and breathing and all the rest of it was to allow your body to be comfortable enough so that you could meditate for many, many hours every day. That's generally what we're not doing in the West, although I think more and more yoga studios are introducing some degree of meditation into the practice.
If somebody is able to meditate many hours a day, it is toward what end?
It is towards the end of reaching a state of meditation called Samadhi, which is a form of absorption or union with the universe. We might think of it as a classical mystical state, where you see no distinction between you and me and there and then and now and here and so on. All of those ordinary distinctions dissolve. This is, by the way, what the founder of our institute had. Edgar Mitchell was in the spacecraft and had Samadhi with the universe, a very classic mystical experience. Many people report this. Sometimes it's spontaneous, sometimes it's in meditation. We did a survey of 2,000 beginning meditators to simply ask, from the beginning of your meditation practice to now, which might be a matter of months or years, have you noticed any spontaneous arising of things like synchronicities and maybe telepathic impressions and so on? Have you simply noticed this happening? And something like 75% of them say yes.
Wow.
So we have some anecdotal evidence, reporting evidence, that what the classical yoga is talking about is that we're pretty sure that psychic abilities are arising from a very deep part of ourselves. And if you think of this as a mind-matter interaction, very deep in the physical world and very deep in the mental world are more or less the same. That's the assumption here. So if you train your mind to dive very deeply into your mental space, you're actually also diving into physical space. And so one of the reasons why you're able to start having amazing synchronicities and some psychic abilities is because, as we know, deep down in the physical world, the quantum world, it's non-local. That we're no longer dealing with things that are in space or time. It's somehow beyond space-time. Well, every psychic ability, every mystical experience, the one thing that makes it strange is that it is beyond space-time, right?
Yes.
You have connections with people at a distance, either in space or in time. We give it different names like telepathy and clairvoyance, but all of them are considered weird because they don't seem to fit in ordinary space-time.
Is it possible to begin this practice of yoga, as you're defining it, with the goal being to attain one of these superpowers, or is that cheapening it to the point where it doesn't work? In other words, you've got to get to this union with everything before you can even begin to think about it.
Well, some people certainly will take up yoga with the idea that they're going to develop special abilities, yes. And some of them probably will.
So nothing wrong with that attitude about it as you enter into it.
Well, from a classical yoga perspective, you're told to not put a lot of attention on the siddhis because you'll be seduced by the power. And by the way, you actually don't need to reach samadhi in order to have these abilities. Some of them are going to spontaneously arise pretty quickly. But if you get just overjoyed with having occasional telepathy, you might stop doing your practice. And that's the warning in classical yoga, that that's not the goal. The goal is to go way beyond that.
Right. Hold tight. Oh, we're going to break here.
Want to take a ride? From the high desert and the great American Southwest, this is Midnight in the Desert, exclusively on the Dark Matter Digital Network. To call the show, dial 1-952. Call Art. That's 1-952-225-5278.
Dr. Dean Radin is the chief scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. He is my guest tonight, and boy, we are in the deep stuff here. No question about that. Fascinating stuff, actually. All right, Doctor, this one will probably hit you pretty hard, or maybe not, but it's from JDD, whoever that is. I get these computer messages. Art, please ask the good doctor on what basis and what authorities he concludes that the purpose of Samadhi is union with the universe, in quotes, rather than with the supreme creator of the universe. Thanks. Great show. Tricky question. Doctor?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Not really. It's a bad question. It's a tricky question.
Well, I don't know. It's a matter of interpretation. So one of the things, in fact, the reason why I studied yoga, rather than, for example, I could have looked at the charisms of Catholicism. I think that the actual phenomena themselves, the charisms and the siddhis, are basically exactly the same thing. I mean, they're even described in similar ways. Levitation shows up in Catholicism, shows up in shamanism, shows up in yoga, shows up everywhere. Yoga, I decided to take that route because it assumes that these are human abilities. These are not divine gifts.
So there you went.
Yeah. So Samadhi then becomes something about you and the universe. And in that case, you don't need to assume that there's a divine.
Well, that's what they wanted to try to force you to answer.
Well, I mean, personally, I'm not a very religious person, so I don't need the divine. I don't need that hypothesis. Maybe there is some kind of a universal intelligence of some type, but I'm agnostic about it. I don't know.
Well, all right. Let me ask you this. Do you think that reincarnation is a significant possibility?
Well, I think it would be foolish to not pay attention to the case studies. On the other hand, there are a number of ways of interpreting that information, which may or may not suggest that there's actual survival, or at least reincarnation type survival. Since we know that a lot of the data comes from roughly 4 years old, and we know that 4 years old are also about as psychic as they're going to get naturally, and we know that one of the forms of psychic ability is clairvoyance, then a child could use clairvoyance to get any information that they wanted to, in which case they could just as easily get information that they will get lots of positive feedback from their family and maybe researchers who come and study them. So we don't actually know where the information comes from.
Well, we do know that Buddhism certainly supports the concept of reincarnation.
Yes.
And I know that you're going to talk about the Dalai Lama in here, or an instance with the Dalai Lama at the very least. And it's all absolutely fascinating to me. I have this funny feeling that there may be something to reincarnation. But you see, when you say there is, or that there very well may be, then you're getting close to what this person was asking about the creator. And
well, but why? See, why would reincarnation necessarily mean that there must be a divine?
Well, true, I guess. But it would seem to suggest that there is a power far greater than ourselves, and you can call it divine as easily as not.
Right. Is there a power greater than us? Absolutely, that is the case. And I'm thinking of this not so much in terms of traditional notions of God, but simply in how much do we actually know? about who we are and our place in the universe.
Not a whole lot.
Yeah, as compared to what is left to learn, we know almost nothing. So is there the possibility of other life in the universe that knows much more simply because they've been around for a few billion years more? Almost certainly. But those people, to use a word that because I don't know what else to call them, imagine what we know now through science in just 1,000 years from the future today, and where we were 1,000 years ago.
Sure.
We're going to know much, much more about everything. We might, if somebody from 1,000 years in the future came back and gave us a lecture, we would understand almost nothing. And somebody might then mistake them for being divine.
It irritates the hell out of me that I know I'm going to die and not be able to be around to know these things.
Well, that's why things like reincarnation are an interesting idea, because maybe a piece of you will be around. Maybe not. This is part of the great mystery. We don't know yet. That's actually one of the reasons why I do this kind of research, because like everyone else, I'm interested in knowing the answer, but I'm not willing to take it on faith. So,
well, that's what science is, right?
That's what it is.
I do know that eventually science is going to pin a bunch of this down, and I think that physicists and perhaps even some religious people are going to get closer and closer and closer eventually as more gets known, or maybe there'll be a giant war. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
As we discover more about ourselves. There was a movie, probably little known. I wonder if you happen to ever catch it. It was called I, Origins.
No, I don't know that.
Oh. Well, then, to you and the audience, I recommend that you have that experience. You won't think it's about reincarnation, and that's all I'll say. It is incredibly well done, and it simply speculates that as we begin to identify people worldwide by their eyes, the bio identification that you can do with eyes, that they suddenly begin finding two people with exactly the same eye identification. Well, turns out that one of the people was dead, and somehow or another, well, I don't want to give away the whole movie, but I think you get the idea, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my sense is that for many centuries there's been this big split between science and spirituality. That split is slowly going to be closed, and so what we currently call science today and what we currently call spirituality are going to merge at some point, and we'll have better terms for both sides of that what is currently a gulf, but the gulf is going to disappear. And it basically all comes down to what do we know? Well, we know a little bit now, but there's a lot left to learn.
Why are scientists so predisposed to not just dismiss what they cannot prove, but ridicule it?
Well, if you think about the way that science began 400 or 500 years ago, it was very lucky, wealthy people who had the luxury of time to be able to look at the natural world.
Right.
Today, it's people's jobs. So the moment that your job depends on how you talk about things, you have a very strong motivation to go with the flow and to not rock the boat,
sure,
so to speak.
You need to eat.
You need to eat. And
unless you have progressed so far into what you're going to talk about tonight that you don't need to eat.
Well, I made a decision a long time ago that I find these topics more interesting than anything else that I know.
So do I.
I like to eat too, but occasionally I don't have to.
Oh, we will talk about that. Stay right there. Amazing stuff. There are people who actually don't have to eat. Hogwash, you say? Mm-mm.
Midnight in the Desert spans the world. To call us from outside the U.S. and Canada only, use Skype with a headset mic if on a computer and call MITD 55. That's MITD 55.
All right. listen to me very carefully because we are about to open the phone lines, even though, trust me, I could keep Dr. Radin all to myself for the rest of the time. I will open the phone lines. Our public line is area code 952-225-5278. That's 952-225-5278. On Skype in North America, it's MITD51. MITD51. Outside North America, MITD55. So you're welcome to call now and begin lining up, and it will line you up. Now, by the way, when you call the number, there's something new tonight. And that is, it will answer automatically and begin sending you audio of the show. Now, that would be your cue to turn down your device. Whatever your device is, turn it down because you can hear what's happening on the phone. So, again, thank all the listeners for figuring it out for me last Friday night. All right, so here we go. Once again, Dr. Radin, welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's cover a couple of things before we do pick up lines. As an example, the Dalai Lama. Every time the Dalai Lama is around, a lot of prominent scientists who you would think wouldn't want anything to do with the Dalai Lama line up to meet him. How come?
Because they want to take a picture with him or a selfie so they can put it on Facebook.
Well, yes, but that must mean that they think very highly of the Dalai Lama, and a prominent scientist probably ought not think that way.
Well, why not? I mean, he has a certain gravitas and is a Nobel Prize winner and political leader.
Yes.
On the other hand, he's also well-trained in science.
Yes, indeed.
And he's been holding dialogues between Buddhist monks and scientists for many years now. And it's one of the outcomes of it has been very valuable in terms of making meditation research safe for academics.
Okay.
And it's led to all of these wonderful books that are out there now about change your mind, change your brain, books like that. It's all about brain stuff. But the Dalai Lama is somewhat frustrated in all this because he wants the scientists to start talking about the rest of what his beliefs are of Tibetan Buddhism, which involve all of the psychic and mystical experiences. The scientists who are generally invited to those meetings don't know anything about this area, and so they usually just dismiss it, or they say, well, we don't know anything about it.
Uh-huh. Some scientists have even had supernormal experiences. There is your book title, Supernormal Experiences during meetings right. with the Dalai Lama. And I think you know of something specific that happened to a psychologist, Paul right. Ekman, is it?
Yeah, Paul Ekman. So Paul Ekman is a famous American psychologist who came up with the idea of analysis of micro movements in the face.
Uh-huh.
You can tell a lot about somebody by these tiny little movements going on in their facial expressions. So Paul describes a case where he was in the presence of the Dalai Lama, and he said unexpectedly he had this very strong physical sensation, which he would feel in the presence of the Dalai Lama, which he called warmth. But there wasn't any heat involved. It's something that felt very good. It was nothing like he had ever felt before or after. And the way he then started to deconstruct what was happening is that he just felt good. He felt goodness somehow. And he had realized that for much of his life, he had always felt very angry about things. And the anger was simply missing when the Dalai Lama was around. Well, it turns out that one of the special powers, the so-called siddhis that are described in yoga lore, one of them is called radiated nonviolence or radiated goodness. And this is when you achieve a certain state of equanimity in yourself that you radiate it out.
Okay, well that's
around you.
Okay, but that would be almost influencing. In other words, remote influencing, and maybe you're not going to be willing to call it that, but I don't see how you cannot.
Well, it's not influencing in the sense of intention. It's simply presence. Your presence alone will affect people around you.
Well, that's influencing.
But there is also a city that is about influencing people at a distance, and it's very, very similar to what we might call a Jedi mind trick.
Okay, this is Siddhis, right?
Right.
Cities.
So that's a Sanskrit term, and it means roughly perfection or attainment as a result of disciplined meditative practice. Those are the powers. So one of the powers involves influencing others' behavior, very much like that famous scene in Star Wars where Obi-Wan tells the stormtroopers, these are not the droids you're interested in.
Right.
So that's a matter of like wiping somebody's mind momentarily. That has actually been tested in the laboratory.
Oh.
And it works.
Oh.
So the way you test it in the lab, of course, all of the experiments have euphemisms. It's called an experiment in facilitated attention. The idea is that you have put somebody into a room and you have them look at something like a candle flame. And you give them instruction that every time that they notice that their mind has wandered from looking at the candle flame, that they should press a button. Meanwhile, outside the room, you have somebody who's given a task to every so often help that person attend or distract their attention, purely mentally, from a distance. So that's the Jedi mind trick. And the way you measure the result in the experiment is how often the person reports that they've mind wandered.
Right.
So when you're helping them pay attention, the mind wandering should go down. When you're trying to distract them, mind wandering should go up, and that works.
And what kind of differential have you found in experiments?
Well, what you end up with is a probability against chance.
Right.
For pressing the button, and it is a statistically significant effect. It's not wildly strong, but again, the people who are doing the experiment are the equivalent of college sophomores. So you're just average people who are willing to do the experiment can show this effect. That suggests that if you find people who are exceptionally good at this, that they actually can do the equivalent of a Jedi mind trick.
Have you actually observed this done?
Well, I know about the experiments that are done, but I haven't seen people who are exceptionally good at it. Or maybe I have, but they wiped my memory.
Yes, perhaps. But you do think it is within the world of possible.
Yeah, it's actually very similar to a much larger class of studies that are the feeling of being stared at. And Rupert Sheldrake has done a version of that. We've done our own version of it, and that works as well. You isolate somebody, you have a closed-circuit TV that looks at them. They don't know when somebody's looking at them or not. And you measure physiological changes, like a person's heartbeat or skin conductance. And you can see that when somebody's on the other end of the video stream looking at them, their physiology is reacting differently than when there's nobody watching.
Right.
So that has been shown also to be a significant effect, again, in unselected volunteers.
You certainly have a fascinating area of research, Doctor. I need to ask you this because you've got it down here, and I'm not sure what it means. What does your research contribute to the possibility that consciousness is not a product of the brain?
Well, ultimately, that's really what we're talking about here. It's all about what is consciousness. Is it something, as the neurosciences currently say, that it is generated by the brain, thinking of the brain as something like a fancy computer with recursive circuits and information processing and so on, that somehow consciousness gives rise to that, or the brain gives rise to consciousness. The kinds of phenomena that I study, though, strongly suggest that the brain is certainly involved in some aspects of cognition. There's no doubt about that. But whether it gives rise to all of what we know about the mind is strongly questioned by things like clairvoyance.
Or are higher levels of consciousness simply reached when you put yourself in the proper state, as you've been describing? In other words, that consciousness is out there kind of like, I don't know, kind of like the ionosphere circles the world, and you can put yourself in a state to, in essence, meld with it.
Well, if that is the case, if I understand correctly what you're saying, you go into a state of consciousness that is generated by the brain, but now it's sort of hovering outside your head somewhere.
Yes, exactly.
If that is the case, and you take a quantum model, again, to use that word, quantum, because some aspects of quantum mechanics are not in space-time, which gives it the possibility of extending out through space and time. Well, maybe something like that could explain clairvoyance or precognition. We actually don't know at this point. In fact, if you look at surveys by neuroscientists, there's a very nice one looking at the unsolved problems of neuroscience. Every discipline does this every so often. They have a list of things that we don't know yet.
Mm-hmm.
One of the unsolved problems in the neurosciences is what gives rise to consciousness, in this case meaning awareness, self-awareness. We don't have any idea. In fact, that's listed as one of the things that we may never know from a neuroscience perspective.
Well, wasn't consciousness classically oversimplified by people just saying consciousness is self-awareness?
Well, the mysterious part of consciousness certainly is awareness and self-awareness, yes. The more that we've learned about the unconscious aspects of the mind and the brain, you begin to see that a lot of what we talk about as unconscious is brain stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's pre-processing and other kinds of brain things going on. The way that we know that is through correlations, right? I mean, they're basically only correlations that we see, neural correlations of consciousness, in both at the level of awareness and below awareness. But correlations don't mean causation. It's like one of the first things you learn in statistics.
Yes,
the correlation looks like it's coming from the brain, but we don't actually know that.
That's true. All right. Would you be willing to take a few questions?
Sure.
All right. Let's try it. Seattle, Washington. Hi.
Hi there. I've been listening to the theory of consciousness, and I wanted to know if
have a great day.
I have an idea. Is it possible that the mind is actually just a conduit for consciousness? In other words, consciousness being somewhere else, and that as we register brain waves, we're just seeing that the mind is like a receiver for consciousness.
Yeah, it's funny. I
actually lies elsewhere.
Yeah, it's almost what I just asked. Doctor?
Yeah, that is certainly one of the possibilities. That mind is a filter of consciousness out there, or a receiver of consciousness. And actually, it's very similar to what I talk about in my book, Supernormal, that yoga philosophy, at least one form of yoga philosophy, is called Sankhya. It actually postulates that the universe consists of actually three things. One is pure consciousness. It's just fundamentally out there. It's just something that's there. It's part of the fabric of reality. The other thing is the physical world is there. It's like a real thing. It's what science studies. You can't deny it. But the mind is the thing that connects the two. So, interestingly, in yoga, the mind is considered to be partly pure consciousness, pure awareness, and also partly physical. So it's interesting that these ideas are thousands of years old, and how they came up with it, who knows? But it actually kind of fits what we're beginning to learn from a combination of neuroscience and the kinds of research that I do. It suggests that the mind is both physical, it's partially brain, but it's not completely brain. It's also something else, which we can call consciousness.
Help you, caller?
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Let's go to somebody banging in. I'm not sure where you are. Hello.
Hello?
Yes, hello.
Hello. It's wonderful to talk to both of you. You are my current heroes. And I wanted to talk about a couple of things. I specifically went to college to get my master's in clinical psychology to study this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And just like Dr. Radin, it's exhilarating. It's fun. It's what I would do. I mean, I wouldn't jump in the middle of the ocean with a bunch of sharks. That would terrify me. This doesn't scare me. as it does a lot of people. Also, I think the ego, you talk about the ego as blocking
Yes.
Psychic experience. I think that the ego does create an interference in psychic experiments when you get, like, let's say, 10 psychics all in the same room and test them to see how good they do. Their egos and the seriousness of it might cause a problem. If you keep the experiments on a play basis, like for fun, let's see how far we can do this. Even if you wanted to do it competitively, but make it more of a game to keep that looseness and the game feeling about it, where it's not too dark and too serious. I'm thinking that might work really well.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I've done some research into astrology, which is probably not your thing right now, but it turns out that I did some psychic experiments decades ago with a woman I met on the beach, and we were using 5 different objects, like a plant, a rock, a crystal, a bell, kind of similar to the 5 cards that are used in psychic experiments. And we found that we did really, really, really good when the full moon was in Pisces. And coincidentally, Pisces is the most psychic sign there can be.
Okay. Well, I don't know about that, but what she suggested earlier is interesting, Doctor, that if it's not such a structured, serious experiment, if it's done more casually, as almost in a game, you might get a better result. Any experience with that?
Yeah, well, she is completely correct in terms of ego getting in the way.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely, we see that happen in the lab a lot. It's one of the reasons, by the way, that we don't test people who come to us who claim to have special abilities, because the moment that they learn that maybe they have some kind of ability, their ego always becomes inflated, and we don't want to be responsible for that.
So it is possible, Doctor, let me just get this out of the way because it opens up an area of exploration for me. It is possible that there are many people out in our world today that have superpowers of one sort or another, who are totally keeping it to themselves, and that even if they began to show other people, they learned very quickly that that was a bad idea. And they keep it totally to themselves, and perhaps they use it for advantage in life, advantage in business, advantage, period.
Right.
You think?
I am pretty sure that that is the case. In fact, when I talk to business leaders and politicians and people in the military, initially, some years ago, when I started to talk to high-level people, I didn't know whether they're going to be highly skeptical or how they're going to respond to the kinds of things that I've been looking at.
Right.
But pretty uniformly, they agree that they would not be where they are unless their intuition was exceptionally good.
Mm-hmm.
They may not talk about this in terms of psychic ability.
No, they wouldn't. They would say intuition is a much easier word to digest without beginning to burn the witch.
Right. And they will privately all admit that they're completely on board. So these talks that I give are easy to give, and very few very strong skeptics within those fields, because as they tell me, they wouldn't be where they are unless they were repeatedly correct in making decisions where there was no other form of information.
All right, Doctor. Hold tight. We'll be right back. This is just a 2-minute break. Fascinating stuff. Absolutely fascinating. Dr. Dean Radin is my guest. And if you've been with us, you've got to have a question. And I still can hear him say, talk to me, so you can't see what's going on.
Remember, when When calling Midnight in the Desert, let the phone ring until answered. These calls are unscreened for your listening pleasure. Call 1-952-CALL-ART. That's 1-952-225-5278.
That's actually interesting because we've got a sort of an auto answer now. When you do call the line, what's going to happen is you're going to hear the audio of the show like that. That means you've made it. So hold on. It's auto hold. And it's also auto audio. In other words, you get the audio of the show. Means you've made it. Hang in there. You'll be on the air. And when you get on the air, you'll hear a little boing sound. Kind of cool, actually. A little boing. Let me demonstrate that to somebody right now. Hello there, caller. Did you just hear a little boing? What was that, a yes? Hello, caller. What a terrible demonstration. I'm on the line. I'm trying to get it. Caller, are you there? Going once, going twice. All right.
Yes, I'm here.
Well, what in the world were you doing?
Oh, trying to figure out how it works, but I got it now on. Thank you.
Oh, good Lord. So did you hear a boing or not?
Yeah, I just caught it as I was running into the room.
What a lousy demonstration. All right, anyway, you're on the air with Dr. Dean Hayden. Hello.
Yes. Well, I wanted to ask how, in regards to this subject, as he's taken into consideration, near-death experiences as well as out-of-body experiences, and is that part of how he is, working out the theory there?
You know what? Let's ask about these. Doctor, these are very interesting things. NDEs, fascinating. OBEs, fascinating. And I don't know if you've looked into them or you have an opinion about them, but these are things that I study and interview guests about, and I'm fascinated by. What do you think?
Well, of course, NDEs and OBEs are strong challenges to the idea that consciousness is generated by the brain.
Yes.
Because if you don't have a brain and you still have experiences, well, where's it coming from?
Good point. So your answer is you obviously have to be looking into them because it meets up with what you're talking about.
Well, I look into them in the sense that I'm aware of the literature and I know people who know much more about this than I do. But we tend to do experiments. And it is possible to do experiments with NDEs, as Sam Parnia is doing, but that's a full-time job, and we can only do so much. So I let the experts in the NDE studies do what they do best, and I pay attention, but we're not actively pursuing that area.
You've got enough to work on. All right, let me try this experiment again. It's got to work. I'm going to go to Hawaii. I'm going to say, hi, Hawaii, you're on the air. Did you hear the boing?
Yes, I did.
Welcome to the program, and thank you.
You're more than welcome, and it's an extreme pleasure to talk to the both of you.
Thank you.
And rather than give you all my experiences with ESP and everything and UFOs and
that's all right,
and waste everyone's time, I'm just going to shoot right to the question.
Okay.
Dean, I have noticed, because of my perception over the years, and also Paul Smith has finally agreed to this on one of the other radio shows, that there is no such thing as the number 2. That is the convention. In other words, if you have even a small particle, the very nature of its description is that it is located somewhere and therefore cannot literally be in 2 places at once, even to include the interference patterns that you get with the slit light experiment from Einstein. And so if there is no such thing as a 2, in other words, you can have a bottle of Coca-Cola and you can have another bottle of, well, let's say soft drink, I don't want to say that brand name again.
I don't care. Another Coke.
Okay, well, you can have 2 Cokes, and you do not have a copy of the original I mean, that's all you do have is a copy of the original. You can never have the original over again because it would occupy the same space.
I'm not sure I get it, Doctor.
Yeah, I don't get it either.
Well, let me try one more time here. Any object, even molecules in the universe, and this is macro and micro, are self-evidently individual, but they also are just part of one big thing, the whole universe, whole cosmos.
Oh, the great one.
Yeah. In other words, that's why remote viewing is possible, is because we are there wherever it is that we target. And the grid or the Akashic records or whatever you want to call it does automatic targeting and essentially locates part of where you are already at.
All right. Now I sort of get it. Doctor, have you looked into remote viewing? It is indeed fascinating.
Yes.
Something to it, in your opinion, or what?
Yeah, well, not just remote viewing, but all psi experience suggests that the universe is aptly named, namely it's one thing. Quantum mechanics certainly tells us that the physical world is actually better thought of as relational and as holistic. And from that perspective, it actually makes a lot of sense that the reason that you're able to just as easily tell what's on the other side of a card as the other side of Pluto is because they're not really separate. Separation is an illusion. Right. And by the way, that is one of the core principles in most Eastern philosophies as well.
All right, I understand what he said. Just how he was trying to get us there was tough.
Yeah, because he said there's no number two.
Right.
And I actually use number two a lot in my work, so.
Right. Gotcha. Skype. Tom, you're on the air. Hello, Tom. Going once. Tom has waited so long. Are you sure you're not there, Tom? No, I guess you're not there. Too bad. Let's go to Amy on Skype. You are there, I hope.
Yes.
Okay, turn your radio off, please, or device, whatever it is you've got on.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay.
Hi, Dean.
Hi.
Dean, you had mentioned that neuroscience doesn't know what consciousness is. I was wondering, do you feel that your line of thought alludes more to pseudoscientific magical thinking, rather than the fact that we have not yet neuronally mapped what one would define as consciousness?
I'm simply reflecting what leading neuroscientists say when they're reviewing the evidence that we currently know about what gives rise to consciousness. But it's not only that. If what we see in the laboratory for phenomena like telepathy and so on are real, which I think the evidence is pointing in that direction, then a brain-centric understanding of consciousness does not seem to be sufficient. Now, the only proviso to that is if the brain is also operating on quantum principles, which of course is at least as controversial as the existence of psychic phenomena, then the possibility arises that the brain could give rise to consciousness, and Art mentioned this earlier, and consciousness then, or awareness, is actually not just in your head as a classical physical object, but is also spread out in space-time as a quantum object. And in that sense, you can create a completely physical explanation for why the psychic phenomena are real and why the brain would generate consciousness.
Yeah, but I feel that we're dealing with areas with a lot of mystery, and there's a lot of subjective thought around it. And personally, I don't feel like there's any compelling evidence for what you're positing. However, I do find it interesting, and thanks for having me on the show.
You're very welcome. But actually, there is compelling evidence. I mean, statistically, it's very compelling, Doctor.
I agree. I mean, that's what we see in the laboratory. That's what people have been looking at for over 100 years. The notion of not seeing the evidence or not feeling compelled by the evidence is an interesting one, because we know that a priori decisions or a priori beliefs about data strongly determines what you can see. And it's in both directions. It's a sword that cuts both ways. Mm-hmm. If you start out thinking this stuff probably isn't real, then you can't see it very well. You can't evaluate it very well. The other side, of course, is if you completely believe everything, then even the evidence which isn't very good, you'll see it in a very positive light. So this is not just true in this field, but every area of science is always dealing with the notion of how do we get beyond our a priori biases. And ultimately, we do the best that we can to provide the best evidence that we can, and the future will let us know who's right.
All right. Let's see. This is Karen on my wormhole, which sends me messages during the show. And she says that Twitter is asking Dr. Radin to please review the time frame of the 9/11 random generator results. And that is worth talking about for just a moment. Indeed, 9/11 registered big time on the random number generators. However, it, if I recall correctly, registered...
However, that is where we will leave that for tonight. Come back tomorrow to hear the rest of that particular train of thought and, of course, further conversations. Till then, please like, share, and subscribe. Get us to the goal of 50,000 views, 1,000 subscribers. So Boxy over and Extras will send us those nice red boxes. And, of course, Google, YouTube will just actually start paying attention to us. Coinbase below, Ibotta, and Gain.gg are all there. Get some free coin, help out the show at the same time. So therefore, even if you don't want to spend your own money, you can go ahead and help yourself move along in Dominion through things you normally would do anything, like watch videos, surf the web, shop through Ibotta, what have you. So until next time, again, like, share, and subscribe, be kind to one another, and release the Kraken as we march along here from day one. Have a great night and enjoy your night's rest, everybody.